It might sound weird at an event like this, but we are going to be talking about information security, and we shall look at it in the most refined manner, really, because we shall be interested in the ways you can protect the fruits of intellectual labor, intellectual work. Now, some people actually call it paper security. Maybe it was initially designed as a pejorative term. We shall be talking about compliance here today. There was a long protracted discussion yesterday about the role the youngsters play in modern-day security. Well, I can tell you that I once worked as a deputy general director of a large telecom company in charge of security, and I never even once wanted to have a hacker on staff. When we wanted to do pen testing, we commissioned an external business to do that. If you believe that know-how can be stolen like that, or like that, when people get into the network from the internet, you're deluded. This nearly never happens. This is how intellectual property is usually stolen. Your beloved workers, whom you have entrusted with the secrets of your enterprise, just take them home. Maybe because they just want to show how smart they are by talking at conferences like this. Maybe because they want to start their own business. Or maybe because they've just been given a bit of money to do that. There is no need to hack the system. You don't need IDS, you don't need IPS, or at least they won't help you in fighting this kind of theft. Very often, intellectual property is stolen like that. When you talk to investors, partners, lenders, when you try to license out your intellectual property, or when you try to get a franchise, or to sell a franchise, we shall certainly discuss all that today. What I'm going to tell you today is essentially a digest of the research that has been carried out by my law firm. That focused on actual protection of the rights of intellectual property owners in the Russian Federation and its courts. Very often, I have to tell my clients that this is a doomed endeavor. Well, in fact, our report is 160 pages long, and it covers 20 different cases. What you see here is the latest data from InfoWatch, published in April 2013. Shown on the right is the leaks of trade secrets around the world. Shown on the left is Russian data. 26% of all leaks are leaks of trade secrets. This is catastrophic, in my opinion. 26% of your intangible assets can get leaked just like that. Actually, are leaks like that. I made a presentation to a defense company last week, and I learned a nice number. Do you know how many, do you know the value of all the weapons we sell every year? $12 billion. And do you know how much money Russian defense companies actually lose every year because of illegal production of weapons? Sorry to speak, stolen from us. $6 billion, half of what we actually get. Do you know how that happens? Well, this first and foremost happens because many of our corporations just don't have the rules for protecting the trade secrets. For some reason, our employees are not loyal. They think they're underpaid, they're under-recognized. Actually, what you see here is data from semantic research. 65% of employees put their corporate documents on their personal devices, and they don't see it as a problem. And then they won't delete it, and eventually this information will end up elsewhere. 56% employees believe it's okay to use confidential information. And 51% believe it's okay to acquire, so to speak, to use corporate information simply because they see their companies don't care about it. This is a horrifying number. This essentially means that they can come to the company and grab something for personal use. In fact, network attacks are a fraction of the problem. The biggest problem is staff migration, staff turnover. It's very difficult to refresh the brain, to flush out the brains of your outgoing employees. And they know exactly what is valuable and what is not. So they will try to take out as much as they can from the company. Well, I've been to AMD in Silicon Valley. And I know now that AMD is dying. I felt it was dying last year already. Do you know what happened to them? Their VP, responsible for development for video games chips, and that was really the only niche they had left to them after they lost to Intel. Well, he obviously left the company for NVIDIA. He took with him four leading experts, and he asked them to copy everything they could. So they copied 100,000 files from AMD, and now, not surprisingly, NVIDIA is the leading market player in video chips. Well, we usually publish articles on something that we know, something that we do for the company. And we want to grow professionally and become more recognized in the company. Very often we talk on conferences, we do exchange of experience. If, for example, you have a conference on multi-component fertilizers, you will certainly present something about your great achievements in developing new multi-component fertilizers. Well, I like making this example. Imagine you have developed a stable one-wheel bicycle. You have a great idea, you don't have the money to produce it. You start looking for an investor, be it a venture firm or a business angel, and nobody will take your word for it. They tell you, no, we gotta see your technology, we gotta see your papers, show us your designs, prove that the system works. And then people will tell you that it sounds weird and crazy, but the bank doesn't have an interest. And then several months later, an company affiliated with the bank will start mass producing it. Because by this time you will have already given away your technology, your know-how, and you haven't really protected your rights. You haven't signed an NDA, you haven't patented anything, you're doomed. Very often, when we collaborate on projects, we have to share our technologies. And if we don't segregate the rights and duties, we lose confidentiality. And in line with Chapter 4 of the Civil Code of the Russian Federation, you lose confidentiality, you lose exclusivity. Well, finally, some people try to sell secrets. They are proactive. They look for potential buyers. Well, very often, we have to recognize this is the kind of country we live in. People can be forced to hand over information. But a very important factor is that companies usually are very lax in enforcing their security standards. I'm very often asked about the Constitution. People tell me, no, we can't really control it because of the Constitution. I'm sorry. Trade Secret Law, Clause 10, states that you must develop a system and you must maintain it. Well, if you state that you cannot send any trade secrets via email, if this is your policy, then you need to control and monitor whether this policy is followed or not. Okay, we refer here to the specific law that deals with trade secrets, and this law states that it's there to defend the rights of bona fide businesses. Bona fide right owners, so to speak, shall be protected by courts, but they should remember that this protection is only available when a range of specific requirements are met. Well, these requirements are bad, but do relax, past lex. Well, then we need to spell out how you can use this confidential information, these trade secrets. And there are very strict rules that dictate how your employees should go about it, how they should deal with it when they interact with partners, other businesses or regulators. In fact, there are three key objectives for us. Well, first, we want to really protect the intellectual property, the trade secrets that we have. Also, we want to have a potential recourse to state institutions like courts if our trade secret rights are violated, and we want a law enforcement machinery to prosecute, persecute, and punish those who do the violations. Say, if you want to fire an employee, you understand that you first need to prove that he has disclosed trade secrets. You can't just fire a person on the sheer basis of suspicion. Please remember that trade secrets that are protectable, defendable under the law must have a number of features. First, a certain commercial value arising from the fact that it's currently unavailable to other parties. And I've often talked to people who say that the topology of your information system is a trade secret. Can you sell this information to somebody who will pay you for that? How much? Nobody has thought about it, really. People tell me, well, then it's not a trade secret. Another important factor is that third parties don't have easy access, legal access to this information. In order to answer this question, You need to look up the legislation and see who actually has access to it, who is entitled to have access. There have been a number of funny disputes among shareholders. In accordance with Articles 81 and 91 on joint venture companies, shareholders have unconditional rights to access many sorts of information about the activities of the company. So, for example, if your joint stock company is public, meaning that it's publicly traded, well, this means that pretty much anyone can become a shareholder. And therefore will have legit access. Does anybody here work for a joint stock company? Do you know that you must provide everything pertaining to the work of the board of directors to your shareholders? Well, our boards of directors like claiming that what they are doing constitutes a trade secret. And finally, by the way, there is a third requirement, that the trade secret regime must have been sort of introduced. If you don't have this regime, then there is nothing to protect, essentially, from the viewpoint of the legislation. Therefore, you cannot claim damages in the court of arbitration from a company or an employee. Well, you can ask, why do we need all that? Why can't we just close access to this information? And indeed, this can be done. Very often people tell me, we just put a confidential stamp on our documents and we never show it to anybody. But the problem here is that there is no liability for disclosure of confidential information. You can only essentially limit access to information as long as it is considered trade secret and protected as such. Otherwise, you will be violating constitutional rights to access to information. In fact, the federal law on trade secrets will tell you of the classes, essentially, of it contains a list of specific activities you need to undertake. First, you need to develop a list of information that actually constitutes trade secret. Secondly, you must limit access to information that constitutes trade secret. And there should also be a control measure in place. If you don't enforce it, that means you don't have anything. You should also set up a system to account for all the people who have been given access to these trade secrets. Well, this will create a colossal problem in terms of accounting for access to ERP and CRM systems. How do you prove then that a person accessed a particular CRM system and received information that constituted trade secrets and some regular information? And also, you need to regulate your relations with your employees regarding trade secrets. And please remember that the papers that they sign vowing not to disclose trade secrets are nil, are zilch. They, from a purely legal perspective, have no real value. It can easily be contested at courts. You in order for it to work, you need to enter it as a clause in the civil law contract. And also, all the documents that consider trade secrets must carry trade secret on top of them and a reference to, I think, the actual location of the owner. So it's only when you meet all these requirements, however weird they might sound, you can count on court defense. In fact, in this trade secret area, in most cases we see suits when people are fired for disclosure of trade secrets, and then they contest it in courts. What's also prominent is criminal persecution for illegal disclosure and usage of trade secrets. Well, in fact, this is an article of our legislation of the criminal code that does work. Interestingly, the second most important type of litigation is arbitration, when you have essentially several companies that have been trying to use the same development, they end up in court. Very often, shareholders take their companies to court when they refuse to disclose some key information, and we certainly know of the Navalny versus Transneft case in this respect. And finally, there can be some civil cases related to improper use of trade secrets. Doesn't happen too often, really. Okay, you know this company, they sell, there's some small company that sells goods via auto catalogs. So they hire a person, and the person then leaves the company, starts his own business, and starts calling the same clients that auto had and offers them slightly lower prices. The former employer tries taking the former employee to court, claiming a lost profit of 500,000 rubles. And the court asks, how come do you want us to actually do that? Well, because we have a database which is a trade secret. Well, if it is a trade secret, then you gotta prove that all this time you've been operating this database in line with the trade secret regulations. You have established a kind of a trade secret regime. And we didn't even have a civil or labor contract with the employee. So they never got their compensation. Another case, a programmer has developed software for the company, and then he started selling it to others. And that's Renaissance Insurance, which is a well-known business in Russia. So they tried taking him to court, and the judges asked them, can you actually prove that indeed the person has disclosed information that is covered by your trade secret rules? How can you put a stamp on it? It's software code. Well, actually, we found a way around this problem. But you gotta remember that it's impossible to protect yourself in court if you haven't established this trade secret regime. Well, patents are very different, because patents are about official disclosure of your information and granting access to the usage of patented ideas on the basis of royalty. Well, for example, Philips has this patent for DVDs, and everybody should pay them a royalty of 10 cents. Or take Coca-Cola. It has been produced since 1886, and the recipe of Coca-Cola has been in a safe box, strong box, all this time. It's not patented. Nobody can actually prohibit you from producing Coca-Cola, because it's not patented. And when one of the American hotels found a recipe that was purportedly Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola said they were prepared to fund its production at any plant in the United States, and they ended up producing Baikal, not Coca-Cola. Baikal is a fizzy drink, Russian. Well, if you do everything properly, like the Popov plant in St. Petersburg, essentially empowered some of their partners to use one of their ideas, and these partners shared these ideas with their partners, and they lost the court battle. There was this transportation company that fired an employee for disclosure of a trade secret, and then he took the company to court trying to prove that there was no trade secret and he shouldn't have been fired. Well, then the company proved it was right by providing the court with a list of the bits of information they considered trade secrets, and show they had a regime, a trade secret regime in place. And so the court case crumbled. What kind of information can be considered a trade secret? Well, it should have the three characteristics I've mentioned already. Well, very often you can try, or you can see that other people are going to contest that the information they disclosed was a trade secret. And actually our legislators played an important role in making this possible, because they confused our citizens very much with the new wording that says that production secret and know-how is the same. The law on trade secret also gives us optionality. If you combine the two legislations, you will realize that trade secrets and production secrets and know-how are the same thing. And know-how, obviously, will also be seen as a technology or any other type of information that has commercial value. For example, a company has fired the head of an HR department because this gentleman first gave the organigram information on salaries to one of the trainees who actually put it up in the factory floor, claiming that it is not a production secret and therefore it cannot be seen as a trade secret. But the court decided that this information can be considered a trade secret, because if you do it properly, you can minimize the headcount, you can minimize management expenses, and so on and so forth. Does that consider a commercial secret? Does it translate in certain business value? Sure. Well, there is this company in Russia that has 20% less desks than employees. You can even see it as a commercial secret, a trade secret. However, if you include in this list of information the data that is not defendable, you won't be able to defend in court. There's another interesting case, and before I comment on it, please note who I'm talking about. This is not Aeroflot, RZD, or Rosatom. I'm telling you about some very small companies. Trade secret is really required for small companies much more than for giant companies, for a simple reason. They usually don't have anything else. Everything else they have is available to just anyone else. So someone in this little baking company tried to buy shares from other founders, and in order to do that, she actually collected this information on all the shareholders and sort of disclosed it. And they kicked her out of the joint company, claiming that this was confidential information. But they lost in court because data that can be found in the charter in the Articles of Association of a company cannot be considered a trade secret, because by definition it has to be public. In fact, this list of trade secrets is one of the key elements in establishment of a trade secret regime. Actually, if you botch this element, you'll have very hard time in court. Take Infotrack Print, a small business from Novosibirsk. These guys fired an employee for disclosure of some trade secrets. He took him to court, claiming that well, he really just wanted his firing to be reclassified. He didn't want his work record to be marred by something like that. And the court granted his wish because it decided that essentially his labor contract contained a different list of trade secrets compared to the one that was proposed by the company. And that alone was enough for him to win the court, to win the case. So since he was guided by his personal labor contracts, he had the full right to disclose the information that was not termed as trade secrets in this particular contract. Article 91 states that essentially a company must provide access to shareholders to the documents stipulated in Item 1, Article 89 of the Federal Law. Well, with some documents, you need to have 25% of shares, but this is preferred shares, right? So, what are the rights of shareholders? Well, we give here the list of different documents that must be stored, must be made available to shareholders when they demand them, like accounting documents. Internal documents, and this is a very interesting notion because it's very difficult to draw the line. Then you have the minutes of the boards of director meetings, reports from independent evaluators, and lists of affiliated parties. So if you establish this trade secret regime in your company and you claim that this data is a trade secret, well, you're risking seriously losing in court, because the court will state that it cannot be considered trade secret, because this information under the legislation has to be made available to third parties. And we can illustrate with a specific cases. German Simakov had a 16% stake in a company Spetsgidrostroy, and he said that granting him no access to some documents was a violation of his constitutional right? And eventually, you can just join hands with our shareholders as long as collectively you hold 25% shares. The court will have to support you. They will say that the right to study all these documents stipulated in Article 89 is unconditional and cannot be limited. Which means you will have to provide this information to your shareholders, whatever you think about it. Well, this is the well-publicized case with Navalny versus Rosneft. So Rosneft first refused to provide him with the minutes of the board of directors meeting, and the Constitutional Court that we should maintain a balance between the interests of the shareholders and the joint stock company. So we need to consider the potential impacts and the potential impact of disclosure of this information. Well, if you have, one share of Lukoil, Gazprom, and others, you're not really acting in the interests of the competitors. You're only acting in your own interests. Well, that was a very interesting case, certainly. On the same day, in 18th of January, the Supreme Court of Arbitration said that presence of documents, trade secrets and other protectable information in the documents requested by a shareholder cannot be an unconditional reason to reject the request for information disclosure. Well, some companies actually had this funny idea of asking their shareholders to sign affidavits that they are not going to disclose this information. And actually, there have been some funny cases like this. Well, we've mentioned already this trade secret regimes. Courts of arbitration usually pay a lot of attention to the composition of this regime, essentially. That's a classical case, really. You only have what you protect. So an economic security employee of Udmurtneft was made responsible to develop some tender documents. Udmurtneft decided that before they actually publish this information on some portal, this information should be considered a trade secret. Well, this person decided that this information would be of interest to potential participants. This was uncovered, he was fired, and he demanded that he was restored to his position, and he won the case and was compensated because the company failed to prove two key things. First, they failed to prove that the electronic documents that contained all this information did carry the confidential stamp, and the company also had no real enforcement. He said, well, I was not the only person who could send it. This document was not classified. There was no perceived requirement in the company to put such stamps. So he argued, you cannot hold me liable. when you license something out, you need to be very specific as to what you want to get. So there is this pizzeria network working in Siberia, and one of the potential owners of such a restaurant was about to get some of their trade secrets. Well, actually, they use this commercial concession kind of contract, and this is how all these McDonald's work. So in this contract you will find some trade secrets that relate to actual cooking routines, some internal rules, some logo information, so that your restaurant looks just like the other one. That's why if you come to any city in the world, you will recognize McDonald's because of the golden arches, you will recognize their employees in their brown outfits, and in all their toilets you will also see cleaning buttons. Do you think these restaurants are owned by McDonald's? Certainly not. They are operated by concessionaires. So this owner of the new restaurant got this documentation and learned that it didn't really have any trade secrets. They just talked generally about producing pizza. So he took them to court. He said, well, I'm sorry, you gotta reach a contract. The guys promised they were going to give you just as much. Therefore, you cannot claim it in an invalid contract simply because you didn't learn anything new from it. You must work in companies that love something like that to put in their contracts, that the content of this contract is confidential information, and this information can only be given to other parties with prior written confirmation. It's an absolutely useless piece of language because the list of trade secrets should be exhaustive, should be pre-established. Well, for example, this particular company signed contracts with electricity suppliers, electricity consumers. Then they were asked on what terms they actually sold electricity. Then it turned out that they sold electricity to another client at different prices, and the second client took offense, and they tried to protect themselves by saying that this was trade secret, this was contained in the contract, and they lost. For this company, they didn't have a top secret stamp on their designs. Small companies that arose around Uralvagonzavod started producing the hooks that connect different cars to each other. So they started producing them using seemingly designs of Uralvagonzavod, and they couldn't protect themselves because Uralvagonzavod could not prove that they actually had the stamp on their designs. Well, this is a well-known case of ADD distribution. Well, this company became a victim of their former sales and marketing director who sold a similar product to the same customers. So they couldn't really protect themselves in courts. So he said, well, we just analyzed the existing public databases of legal entities. This is where we found everything. This is it. And when the company really uncovered an email which contained a list of all the clients sent by the sales director to his personal email address, but the court didn't take this argument, simply stating that other people had access to his email account, including the web administrator, so this could have been a setup. Well, that was a case when the tax inspectorate tried to counter, essentially, the tax deductibility of VIP guards for Severstal, and they lost it. Okay, let me finish it off with two examples. One deals with Zaslavsky brothers. That was, in fact, the case of Tinke BP espionage versus Gazprom. The Zaslavsky brothers were given a notional term, but this is a more interesting case. Rosgostrach, which is Russia's largest insurance company, it has been trying to fight systematic trade secret losses. Pretty much every year there are cases against Rosgostrach branch managers who are caught trying to sell their client bases. Say very often people from Moldavia, for example, go to Moscow, work several months in the company, and then they publish this announcement on the net that for 50,000 rubles they are happy to share details of 50,000 customers of Rosgostrach. And then Rosgostrach actually pretends to be a buyer, and the guy gets 1 year in prison. Well, this last case illustrates information disclosure. You can punish people for information disclosure. So an Arctel employee, and Arctel is a telecom company, leaked some private data to her own Gmail account. And when she was fired for disclosure, she claimed, "That was no disclosure, I just sent it to myself, I wanted to work on this data at home." I'm not going to ask you whether you use Gmail or mail.ru. My question is different. Have you ever read your user agreements? Wow! No, but you are security people, so then you will know that you don't own anything there. That your whole mailbox is owned by mail.ru and gmail.com. And they can discontinue their service anytime they like. And according to our laws, in order to be considered the owner of the information, you must have created it. And if this inbox, if this mailbox is owned by mail.ru, this means you have leaked it, you've disclosed it to a third party. Let me give you some simple conclusions. We are developing practice, so to speak, court practice, in protection of IP rights. If you meet the existing requirements, you can try successfully defending your case in court. In fact, you can even claim lost profit. But we are here talking about paper-based security. If you fail to meet at least some of the requirements, even petty details, will invalidate your position at court. Thank you. We have a little bit of time for your questions, if you have them. What kind of documents do we need to sign with the employee? Well, in his labor contract, he should also sign that, put his signature on under the list of rules and the list of trade secrets. That should be enough. But it should be part of his labor contract. What about NDAs? I'm sorry, under the Russian legislation, This NDA will only work if it is an appendix to your labor contract. We have seen that most Russian companies sign indefinite labor contracts. So your NDA will only work if it is styled as an appendix to a labor contract. Can we refer specific documents from the labor contract? Yeah. And again, you should then provide a signature of the employee. And if one legal entity signs this labor contract with an employee, and another produces this list of trade secrets, well, it's actually regulated by the trade secret law. You will then need to point out in your labor contract that these trade secret undertakings are valid for both the trade secrets of the company and its counterparties. I couldn't hear the question, unfortunately. Well, actually, you can fire a person for disclosure of somebody else's private data. What about email? Well, you can use a trade secret stamp in your emails, and if you don't use encryption tools, this means that this information will then be available to all ISPs. And you won't be able to prove that you've undertaken all the sensible measures required to achieve the right target level of confidentiality. Our law states it clearly, loud and clear, that you must have this trade secret stamp. Well, our partner we won a case against one of our former clients who hired Baker and McKenzie by relocating the jurisdiction from Stockholm to Moscow and then proving that their confidentiality notice was invalid as long as it was in English. Well, you don't need to stamp a registration number. You only need a stamp. There are many nuances. I had a customer whose only trade secret was a database of their VIP clients, and all their managers had access to it. Well, we eventually found a way to protect them. It, by the way, involved issuance of corporate phones and prohibition on the usage of personal phones. It's impossible to hear whatever the lady says. Well, as the owner of information that constitutes a trade secret, can demand that the information remains confidential, and if the person refuses, you can take him to the court of arbitration. Well, the moment you have found something via Google, you should consider it no longer confidential. And in line with Russian civil code, your exclusive right to production secrets can only be maintained as long as you maintain confidentiality. So if some commercial information has been posted in a blog, it means it's no longer confidential. Well, you can still be held liable for blogging about it. And if you claim that you found it on Google, well, then you can't hold the person liable. Well, but he will have to prove then that he first found it on Google. What about encryption tools? Do we have to use encryption tools that are certified under Russian Ghost? No, not necessarily, but in case of conflict, you will have to prove that your encryption tools were legally imported into the Russian Federation. Well, this stamp, top secret, probably must refer to the documents. No, it refers to the information itself. So you can put the stamp on the flash drive, for example. Well, I think that all documents that are considered top secret must contain the stamp on every page. Secondly, we actually had this client where we tried to prove that their manager was liable, and he leaked information to their competitors, and he sent documents that did not have a stamp. We were able to find a single paper document that had the stamp, and this is how we got the guy nabbed. Had we not found it, he would have escaped unscathed. With databases, actually, there is a solution, but it doesn't work easily. Remember, I told you about Rosgosstrach. You can commit, say, your electronic system to, say, a material carrier and stamp it on with a trade secret stamp then. And it would be best for you to then update your trade list policies. In the trade list, you must then mention this defendable, protectable program. You know what? I'm going to exit the room, and I will answer any other questions you have, but my